Hey, so I'm totally getting into this book. I mean, I've read it like 3 times, but I just love it so much. So I'm excited to read the next chapter. I hope you guys are excited to hear it. Um, let's get started. Chapter 14. Hmm. A dry wind blew down the canyon. Madrone and Little John climbed a trail that wound up the flanks of the hills above the bed of dry stream. Madrone shifted the load on her back. Besides her own pack, she had slung a 5-gallon water container filled with a solar still at the coast. She wasn't too sure about the safety of seawater, but Little John claimed the distillation process removed heavy metals and toxins. And anyway, his look had seemed to say, when you've been here a bit longer, you won't care. She was in the South, at last, for almost 3 months. She'd stayed with the monsters, healing and teaching and training. By the end of her second month, the survival rate among deserters was close to 90%. The work there would never be done, but it had passed the point of the greatest urgency. ISIS had sailed them down the coast, insisting that Little John sleep on the deck. She was full of dire warnings and gloomy forebodings. "You watch your ass," she said to Madrone. "Don't do anything brave or stupid." I'm not stupid. I'm not stupid, and I'm not very brave, so I should be okay. In fact, Madrone was still afraid, but nobody else knew that, unless her fear leaked through her dreams and alerted Bird back home. At times she felt him close to her and heard his song playing in her mind. The dry air sucked moisture from her cheeks and seared her lips. The straps of her heavy pack dug into her shoulders. She hooked her thumbs underneath to redistribute the weight. They climbed swiftly, hugging the cover of the feathery chamise and the broad-leafed toyon. Here and there the path ducked under the thin shade of a stand of live oaks. Their curled leathery leaves blew green and dusty air. Stands of sage anointed them with pungent odors as they brushed by. Overhead a pair of vultures wheeled in slightly tipsy circles, waiting. She heard no sounds but their own muffled footsteps and the rattling wind. After a couple of hours, the stream bed branched. They walked on the canyon floor, over the cracked mud of dry pools and the stones deposited by currents long ago. "Is there ever water here?" Madrone asked. "It flows for a few weeks in the middle of winter, if the rains are good." The trees were taller, sycamores with their mottled bark, and great valley oaks. They were shaded by walls of canyon itself, and Madrone blessed the cooler air, which eased, slightly, the painful dryness inside her nostrils. She wanted to stop and drink, but Little John didn't suggest it, and she felt sensitive about depleting their precious water supplies. They were sheltered from view under the trees, and she could see Little John relax. His walk became looser, more rhythmic. The canyon narrowed and the stream bed wound on and on. They rounded a curve at a narrow point, and suddenly Madrone found herself staring down into the barrel of an old rifle. Its bearer looked to be about 14 years old, a slight brown boy with long greasy hair falling over his eyes. She was impressed. She hadn't seen him or heard him move. "Who is our mother?" the boy asked. "The earth is our mother," Little John replied. "How you doing, Be Good?" "Old John died last night," the boy said. "We took his body up to the rock." "Who's that you got with you?" "The healer." The nose of the rifle dropped abruptly. The boy's eyes stared at Madrone with a mixture of awe and skepticism that made her uneasy. Drink deep on the day of victory, he said. Madrone was confused, but then she recognized that the phrase was a ritual greeting like, "May you never thirst." "Que nunca tengas hambre, que nunca tengas sed," she replied. Little John blanched. Be Good's eyes darted quickly around as if searching for someone who might overhear them. "That's Spanish, isn't it?" Little John said. "I haven't heard it since I was a kid, except from Bird, when he'd get excited." "Watch out," Be Good warned. "Anyone in Angel City hears you talk like that, you be in the pens before you can turn around, with no claim to a soul to call your own. They don't hold with foreign devil tongues, the stewards." He led them out. He led them on through a barrier of brush behind another outcropping of rock. There, on a flat stretch of ground where the valley floor widened, about 20 people lay sprawled under the trees. In the center, a ring of stones surrounded cold ashes. Two figures moved among the bodies, and they stepped forward to greet the new arrivals. "It's the healer," Be Good announced. A man with wild gray beard and staring blue eyes introduced himself as Baptist. The second figure was slight and thin, almost genderless, in a ragged pair of jeans and gray length of cotton wrapped around her head and upper body. Her name, she said, was Arachne, but people call her Rocky. Drink deep, everyone said, but nobody offered any water, and Madrone still felt hesitant to ask, even though her throat was raw and burning. She felt almost obscenely wet, as if every cell in her body was comparatively bloated. These people seemed to be covered with fine layers of dust. Their skin had a leathery look to it, like the leaves of the live oak or the feather-dry foliage of the white sage. She chewed her dry tongue and swallowed, which made her thirst seem worse. Looking around, Madrone felt dismayed. Was this the web? The heart of the resistance? This collection of gasping bodies and old rags? Was this what she'd come to serve? Sorry. Make sure it's no one important. It's probably my mother, who is important, but she will, yeah, she'll drag on and on. So I'm just gonna message her real quick. Oh shoot. Oh well. I'll call her later. Sorry guys. Okay. Let's see. Okay. She chewed her dry tongue and swallowed, which made her thirst seem worse. Looking around, Madrone felt dismayed. Was this the web, the heart of the resistance, this collection of gasping bodies and old rags? Was this what she'd come to serve? "Have you had much experience with the flu?" Rocky asked. Madrone simply nodded. "Would you come look at Highjohn? He's dying." Rocky drew her over to one of the prone bodies. He was naked under the grimy blanket that Madrone drew back, and a smell assaulted her of old shit and dried urine and sweat. Rocky, kneeling beside her, looked up, a faintly defensive note in her voice. "We try to keep them clean," she said, "but there isn't enough water to wash them very often." "That's okay." The man was emaciated, unconscious. His wizened head on his skinny body reminded her of a dried apple on a stick. Highjohn. Was this Bird's friend? When she felt down the energy lines of the body, she could read traces of old breaks and healed fractures of a history of pain. For a moment she thought she could almost hear a long sustained note, sung in Bird's voice. She went deeper, feeling for the cause of his labored breath and weak pulse. Exhaustion, fever, and malnutrition, and underneath, a virus she recognized as one of the simple ones that in the well-nourished produce a 3-day illness hardly worse than a bad cold. "Is he in withdrawal from the boosters?" she asked. Rocky shook her head no. He was never on them. Madrone felt a slight sense of relief, then a deepening of fear as she began to understand the implications. for she could heal. But what if they really needed what if what they really needed was food and rest and water? An old joke raced through her mind, something about instant water. Just add water. She put it aside and began breathing and focusing to draw her spirit helpers, laying her hands on High John. After a moment she stood up, went over to the stream bed, and searched until she found a smooth, round stone. She held it to each of the 4 directions in turn, gathering energy. Then, returning to High John, she passed it over his body, drawing out the sickness and shaking it off to the ground. His fever's gone down, Rocky said, touching his forehead. Madrone nodded. He'll be okay. Can we give him some water? Rocky nodded and returned with a small cup. Hi, John, she said. Can you sit up? The man groaned and opened his eyes. Rocky supported his head while Madrone held the cup unto his lips. She noticed how carefully he drank, first taking a small sip and holding it on his tongue for a long moment, then rolling it in his mouth, and then, after another long moment, swallowing. He repeated the process again. 3 of his swallows drained the cup. Can he have some more? Madrone asked. By rights, he should drink and drink to the flush his system. Rocky looked alarmed. I'll bring him another cup, she said, but it's been a really bad year for water. We just brought 10 gallons up with us. Yeah, but those are for the cisterns for summer when even the wells run dry. At least 1 more cup, Madrone said. She worked on him again with the stone, trying to use energy for the cleansing that could have come from water, trying to still the clamoring panic in her body, which had begun to whisper insidiously, if this is all he gets, how much will you get? I can survive, she told herself. If they can survive, surely I can survive. But suddenly she was filled with the image of the stream that ran outside Black Dragon House. She could smell the moist earth of the gardens it fed. She could hear its musical voice and feel the slippery coolness on her fingers. What am I doing here? She asked, and then thrust the thought aside, for certainly there was no lack of work here for her. She worked on other men with fever and flu, and she looked around the clearing, and she realized that she and Rocky were the only women. Aren't there any other women here? She asked. There are some. You'll meet them when it's time, Rocky said. Madrone sensed something concealed in her voice, but she couldn't read the emotion behind it. Are there any more to look at? She asked when she had finished tending all the men. Rocky hesitated. There's one, but he's being cared for differently. I'd like to see him. Rocky looked at Baptist, who was walking toward them with an armful of firewood. A conversation took place between them in a few gestures, the raising of an eyebrow, the slight shrug of a shoulder. It made Madrone homesick. There was nobody here she could talk to like that, with the change of the set of her head on her shoulders or the soft escape of breath from her lips. This way, Rocky said. She led Madrone further down the path away from camp to an isolated patch of shade under a sycamore. She pointed down, and Madrone looked at a piece of ground that seemed alive. As they drew closer, she made out the figure that lay there. She drew in a breath in shock. It was a human figure, entirely covered in swarming bees. They were crawling and moving over every inch of the body's surface, setting up loud and angry hum, forming a small cloud of arrivals and departures. She couldn't tell if the figure was female or male, awake or unconscious, whole or half devoured. She felt sick. It was like an image out of an old horror video brought to life. She moved to go to the aid of the figure on the ground, but Rocky grabbed her arm and held her back. No, she said. He's fine. They're helping him, but he's enchanted. Don't touch him, or you'll make the little sisters angry. Madrone stopped. Ground, she told herself. Listen. When she listened, she heard the hum of the bees. Businesslike, purposeful. When she felt for the man on the ground, she felt rest after weariness, healing after wounding. There was no horror there, and no fear, only in her own mind. I don't understand, Madrone said. The little sisters are our friends. They're how we live up here. They feed us, and they tend to the wounded. Honey was an antiseptic. Madrone knew that. They were worse things to put on wounds, and if they smeared wounds with honey, bees would come. But something deeper was happening here. Can I go closer? Rocky shook her head. It's not safe, because the sisters don't know you yet. But soon the Melissa will come to give him water. Then, maybe. They squatted down to wait. The hot sun beat on the back of Madrone's neck. She could smell the blooming wild lilac. Its scent made the air sweet, and she could almost feed on it. It could almost ease her thirst. It was not long before they saw something appear from behind the trees. A woman, wearing a cloud of bees like a cloak. Their buzzing was a sustained hum, like a chant. The air seemed to vibrate in harmony, and Madrone felt it move through her body like a sudden rush of intoxication. She smelled something on the wind, like the distilled essence of wild blossoms, honey. The woman seemed to be wearing no other covering but the bees. They crawled over her body like a second skin. The Melissa, Rocky whispered. The Melissa's eyes, the only part of her not cloaked by the bodies of insects, gleamed darkly. A single bee broke loose from the mass and flew toward them, circling them a number of times as if sniffing them out. Hold still, Rocky warned. Madrone grounded herself. She had always liked bees, had even worked the hives herself from time to time, and she tried to beam toward this emissary her admiration of good intentions. The bee flew back to the swarm, disappearing among the others. After a moment, a hole seemed to open in the cloud to reveal the woman's face. She smiled. Drink deep, she said. You are the healer from the north. Madrone nodded. Never thirst, she said in English, since Spanish seemed to produce such shock and alarm. The Melissa gestured toward the wounded man, inviting Madrone to come closer. Don't fear the sisters, she said. With me you are safe. Together they knelt beside the body on the ground. Madrone at first had difficulty seeing an aura around him. The energies and colors were obscured by the flying bees. As she watched for another moment, she realized that the bees were not separate from the man. They had become his aura, his vitality, and their movements were shifting and sustaining his energy field much as she would have used her hands and her own spirit power to strengthen his link to life. As she watched more closely, she saw that the movement of the insects corresponded precisely to the tree-like pattern of healthy energy flow. The inner layer of those who actually crawled on his skin was like the etheric body, and the most dense layer of the energy field. The others, swarming about a foot away, moved in a circular route from his feet up to the center line of his body, branching out along his arms and continuing up over his head to fan out and touch the ground before returning. When she looked closer, she could see his wounds. They looked like laser burns, and she winced in sympathy. There were raw patches over his face and down his left side, and his left arm had apparently suffered a long gash. But that was closed, the edge of the wound bound together with a brown, sticky substance in web-like lines. All the wounded places were covered with honey, and the torn flesh looked clean, pink, and healthy. She could sense no signs of infection. Propolis, the Melissa said, pointing at the binding on his arm. And in here, she indicated the water jug she carried, which she held to the man's lips, giving him a few careful drops. Taste. Madrone nodded and opened her own mouth to receive a drop of something wet and sweet and strong. It lay on her tongue, burning like fire, but tasting like all the compacted, fertilizing power of the spring blossoms. For one moment before it dissolved, she was no longer hungry or thirsty. That's wonderful, Madrone said. It's our way of healing. We don't have much here in the hills, but we have learned to use what we have. I would like to learn your way of healing, Madrone said. It's very strange and wonderful, and maybe I can teach you ours. Maybe, said the Melissa. The sisters work with us to heal wounds, but we who are bound to them cannot come cannot come near the sick. They have a horror of illness. In the hive, they kill the sick bees, the wounded too. But over the years, we have been able to teach them to work with us on injuries as long as they don't get infected. It was difficult to train them. We have had to enter into the hive mind and become part of it, but it has also become part of us. I don't know if we can learn your magic, and if you learn ours, well, once you come into the hive, maybe you won't want to leave. It's very sweet. Madrone spent the rest of the afternoon rechecking her patients in the grove and scouting the hillside and steam bed for herbs. She was allotted a small amount of water for her patients, but fuel was in short supply. They lit fires only at night. Little John said so she couldn't brew Little John said so she couldn't brew medicinal teas. She found a few water jugs of clear glass and filled them with bruised leaves and blossoms for sun tea. She would have liked to bathe her patients, but that was out of the question. The bees cleaned wounds. As for the rest, when the rains came, everyone would wash, but the rains were not expected for the next half year. It's not so bad, Rocky told her. This time of year, you can always hike up to the waterfall. As dusk fell, Little John lit a small fire in the ring of stones and cooked up a broth of stewed acorns. They sat together in a circle. After the sick were fed, Madrone felt her body crying out for something to drink. Baptist handed out cups, and Madrone restrained herself from snatching one from his slow hands. As Rocky poured water, Madrone stared at the clear stream, wondering how she could bear the dryness of her tongue for even another minute. When all the cups were filled, they lifted them high. "Drink deep on our day of victory," they said in unison, and sat gazing the water for a moment. Madrone had been raised to treat water as sacred, but she sensed in that circle a reverence greater than she had ever imagined, a reverence she was rapidly coming to share. She swirled the water gently in her cup. She had never really appreciated the stuff before, how crystalline and transparent it was, how eager to take the form of its container, how it shaped and molded everything it touched. These hills, this flat bed of land, this the course of the stream, the physical properties of the trunks of trees, the rounded shape of the stone in her pocket, her own body's form and the texture of her skin, everything on earth was some revelation of water. Blessed water. Carefully she took a small sip on her tongue, as she had seen High John do. Oh, this wasn't a drink. It was sacrament. Every gland in her body seemed to leap for joy. Her heart was racing. Let it sit for a moment. Feel the coolness. Swirl it in your mouth to wet every cranny. Then let it sit again until it takes on the temperature of blood. She could flick her tongue and set up miniature currents and waves. In her mouth was an ocean, a white-water river like the wild streams of the high mountains she and Bird had rafted together. Finally, finally, when she could hold out no longer, she swallowed, dividing the small pool into 5 or 6 or 10 sections, taking a little, just a little each time to let the dry throat bathe again and again in that blessed sensation of wetness. And then she began all over again. When the cup was empty, she could have drunk another 5, but nobody asked for more. They served her a bowl of food that was strange to her, a nut flour paste mixed with honey. She would have preferred an honest plate of rice and beans, but she ate thankfully, and when her bowl was empty, could have eaten twice as much again. But nobody asked for or offered seconds. When dinner was over, they sat around the fire, talking as it burned to embers and died to ash. Baptist and Rocky were shelling acorns and grinding them between flat stones, their hands working automatically. Madrone offered to help, but Rocky told her to wait and learn during daylight. High John sat propped up against a boulder, wrapped in his blanket. "This may sound like a stupid question," Madrone said, "but what do you do up here? I mean, what's the purpose of these camps?" "Different purposes," High John said. He spoke slowly, wearily, but his face had good color. "First, we're a refuge for the ones who just can't take it any more down below. We give them somewhere to go, mostly west and north of here, where we have larger camps above the beach. Maybe you'll get up to one of them one of these days. There's more women there, and kids even, and more water. But the camps down here, close to the city, they're for raids. We let the stewards know that everything ain't under control. Maybe we blow up a water line one place or cut their communication lines somewhere else. John Brown, that the bees are tending, he got shot busting people out of the pens. Sometimes we raid a food distribution depot, give the stuff away. Steal from the rich, give to the poor, you know." "And are you having much success?" Madrone asked. She was trying to keep her voice neutral, but some of her doubts leaked into it. "Maybe this doesn't look like much to you, but it's growing all the time. We're like fleas on the back of the beast, you know, or like bees. One sting won't do you much harm, but enough of them altogether can kill you." Madrone stared into the fire pit, where the last embers were turning from glowing red to gray. "What do you really want from me?" she asked. "Three things. It's true. We need a healer, as you can see. I would probably be dead today myself if not for you, and I'm thankful. But more than that, the people here, we gotta learn our own powers. We can't depend on witches from the north. We've got to have magic of our own. We got some, you've seen the bees, but we need more." High John's voice sounded weak to her, and she wondered if, as a healer, she was remiss in not insisting he go back to sleep. But he continued. "And there's a third thing. The web is strong, but it's also divided. We got the camps up here in the hills, but we got houses in the city too. Lots of groups, different groups. And they don't all know each other or trust each other. They don't have the sense of being one thing altogether. And you think maybe I can provide that? Maybe. You can provide a focus, maybe, that can bring some of them together. That's why I'm hoping, after you've been up here in the hills for a bit and helped us out, we can send you down into the city." The idea made Madrone shudder secretly, but she said simply, "I'm here to help. I'll go wherever I can be useful." "I hate the city myself," High John said. "Up here, whatever else is happening, you got earth under your feet, the trees and the air. You can actually breathe. Down there, it's nothing but poison. There's grown men down there that have never seen a tree, but some like it." "What's your city like?" Rocky asked a little shyly. "We have lots of trees," Madrone said. "Trees everywhere, and gardens, and fruit trees, and walnut trees, and avocados. Wherever there's a sheltered spot, we grow a lot of our own food right in the city, and there's water everywhere. Not that we have a lot of it, but we conserve it carefully in cisterns and gray water tanks so we can reuse it, and in the irrigation channels. But as much as possible, we let it flow freely in open streams that crisscross the pathways, so you can always hear it and smell it and sit beside it, watching it play with the light." "And people don't steal it?" Baptist asked. "Nobody owns it, so nobody can steal it, and everybody has as much as they need, because we all take care of it together." "But the people, what do they do?" "There are no poor people in our city. Nobody is thirsty. Nobody goes hungry." She knew she was telling the truth, and yet her words began to sound unlikely. A fantasy tale of some mythical place she had invented herself. A dream too good to be true. Keep telling us that, High John said abruptly. People won't believe you, but that won't matter. It don't even matter if it's true or not. Just keep telling us it is. It is true, Madrone said. It could be like that here. We know a lot about reclaiming dry lands. Rivers could run through the valleys like they did a long time ago. People could have enough to eat and drink. Just let it be possible, High John said. True is great, but possible is enough. A lot of things are possible, Rocky said, and Madrone agreed. One of the names of the goddess was All Possibility, and Madrone wished, for one moment, for a more comforting deity, one who would at least claim that only the good possibilities would come to pass. All means all, she heard a voice in her mind whisper. A proliferate. I don't discriminate, but you have the knife. I spin a billion threads now. Cut some and weave with the rest. I'm a healer, not a weaver, Madrone answered back. Same difference. So that was an interesting short chapter. I love the part about the bees. All right, that's it for now.